You are listening to the Cattle Call Podcast. This is the place where computer-aided design and drafting meets humor and practicality, with a touch of business acumen thrown in for fun. Jim and Rocco, the owners of Zentech Consultants, the premier U.S. technology consulting firm for architecture, engineering, construction, and manufacturing, discuss the fascinating world of CAD with some humor and some honesty. The Cattle Call Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back again to the Cattle Call Podcast. I am your host, Jim Coppinger of Zentech Consultants, and with me, as always, is my co-host and business partner, the smarter, wealthier, and, let's face it, the thinner half of Zentech Consultants, Rocco Parisi.
Who told you I'm more wealthy?
You did. You tell me that all the time. I know you make more money than I do, dude. It's totally wrong.
I never put that in writing.
Yeah, that's right. I know your wife and I know where to find your bank accounts. That's all that counts. So, all right. So today we have a very special guest in the studio with us. We have Miss Kim Fuhrman, who is the president of AUGI, the Autodesk Users Group International. And Kim is also a longtime consultant of ours. She works with us here at Zentech Consultants whenever we have Revit or BIM issues that come up with our clients. She also teaches classes for us. And despite that, she's agreed to be here on our show today. So thanks for joining us today, Kim. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
No worries. No worries. So, all right. So when we get into it, Kim, your background, obviously, number one, like I said, you're the president of AUGI, which gives you some real nice, clout in our community. But it also tells you you're an architectural technologist is how you build yourself. Right? What is an architectural technologist? Tell us about yourself and what you do.
So basically, we're on the same level as a starving artist.
Oh, nice.
I'm an independent consultant. I've been in the architectural industry for over a quarter of a century. I'm almost hitting that 30-year mark, which is kind of crazy to think about. But I love helping people. And so a lot of what I do is help architects and engineers with their training, their CAD standards or Revit standards, BIM technologies and so forth. And, I love to go into a company and just, look at their processes and figure out what they're doing right and, how they can improve their workflows. I enjoy doing the training webinars for Zentech, a lot of Revit and Bluebeam training webinars for you guys, which are always a lot of fun. And I just like the variety and kind of the independence of the position. So that's sort of what I do. And, I have to clarify now with AUGI, we are now reincorporated. I'm just going to let you know that it is just AUGI. We are a completely independent organization, and we are really excited about this coming year because we're looking to kind of expand our repertoire and look into some additional software platforms that we can add to everything that we already do. So a very exciting year for AUGI. I'm looking forward to everything that's coming up this year.
I learned a thing. I didn't know that. I thought you guys were still strictly Autodesk. So that's great because, Zentech, we're doing the same thing. We're expanding out with new and different softwares too. So we'll have to talk about that. Outstanding.
Sure thing.
That's great. So what was great about that, Rocco? Did you hear the way you can tell she's an independent contractor. She's I go in and I help people find what they're doing right. When she's thinking, I can see what you're doing wrong, but I can't say that. Yeah, we all know how that goes.
It's on the positivity.
It's all about positivity. That's how they keep you coming back when you're positive. So
for sure.
Excellent. So good. All right. So today, the topic we have in the slate for today, we're going to talk about BIM versus 3D and what really is the difference between BIM modeling, which is kind of a redundancy since modeling is in the word, but it works, and 3D modeling, right, and where they are. So. One of the things that we see a lot here at Zentech, right? A big issue facing folks in the CAD world is, we all have this growing demand for BIM, right? Every project they want a BIM. There are, people are demanding, it's got to be done in BIM when they literally don't even know what the letters stand for. So there's a lot of confusion, I think, out there around what BIM actually is. And for a lot of people, they kind of draw a line between BIM and Revit or some other 3D package, right? They think it's, if you're doing 3D modeling, if you're drawing your stuff in 3D, you're working in Revit, then you're doing BIM, right? But that's not really the case, right? Building information modeling BIM is really about providing additional information. You're talking about adding in construction materials, finishes, installation data, ordering information. I know just a few examples. Really, with BIM data, you can make it do whatever you want. Make the building stand up and sing if that's what you want to do. And the 3D portion of that design, to my mind anyway, is really just, it's a convenient carrier for that data, right? Because we can use the 3D to hold that information. When you're dealing with just base 2D line work, that line work doesn't have the capacity to hold all of that information. All right, you can't use 2D layout for connection, item detail verification, conflict checking, or you can't even really do very good spatial layouts in 2D in the way that you can with 3D. So, going to throw this at you, Kim. There's, as a BIM specialist, right, and a BIM evangelist, an architectural technologist with all these great words. How do you even start that conversation with people who are new to the BIM world, or people who think that they're experts in the BIM world and really don't understand what that BIM is, right? How do you start that education and training to get them to understand what we're dealing with?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because everyone, I think, I shouldn't say everyone, but most people nowadays have heard of BIM, and they have a preconceived notion of what they think that BIM is. And you're right, it hasn't really been standardized even through our industry. And so until we get the industry professionals to agree on what a definition of BIM is, it's going to be difficult to get our owners to understand what they're asking for when they ask for a BIM project. Typically, I'll admit, when I first became a BIM manager, which was, 6 years ago, I transitioned from being a Revit manager to being a BIM manager, and I can honestly tell you that it wasn't that big of a leap at that point. It wasn't until a few years later that I really understood, okay, this is a lot more than 3D modeling. And it is about the information that you put into the model. It's how it's being used and how that model lives on. And so I think when I'm, talking to someone about BIM, I think the first thing that I try to do is to dispel the myth that Revit or any other 3D software program equals BIM, because it really isn't. It's more of a process, and it's a process of taking this information and how it's being used.
Right. And how do they respond to that? I mean, do you find that they're like, hey,
they usually
I get
have
it.
No, it's usually more like a kind of a deer in the headlights look.
Say, what? What are those things? Yeah. I don't know what those are.
Exactly.
So, all right, cool. So, all right, so Rocco. Yeah. So let's sort of at Rocco then. So, how does Kim's approach jive with what you deal with when you spend most of the time talking to the customers, right? I do the back end stuff. Are we seeing a better understanding of the difference between BIM and 3D out there, or do you find in talking to them that the owners, the management, the executive folks, they're still not really 100% sure on what BIM really means?
Yeah, I don't think that there's enough awareness or full understanding of what it is, and I could totally see why Kimberly's saying that. It's kind of like a deer in headlights, Most of the time it's like people come to me, I need to learn Revit tomorrow because we have to get this project done, and it's not. It's not what
good luck getting good luck starting with Revit and getting your project done in 24 hours without.
Yeah.
But that's a good thing. See, that's why Kim has work. So it's good. Yes. That's where you need your architectural technologists, folks. So
absolutely.
Right. Yeah. So I think we're all in agreement there. That's really the big thing, right? It's about getting people to understand basic concept of building information modeling, right? And that it is much more than just the 3D lines and the 3D walls and so on. So, and I think from my standpoint, one of the biggest BIM concepts that I think everybody, and I know I struggled with this when I first started getting into BIM, and like you said, you're moving from beyond base 3D into BIM. And I'll even be honest and tell you, I still struggle with it at some levels. It's the idea of LOD, right? The level of development, right? And how much information and how much detail you're putting into the building model itself. right? And the concept, I think, for people, that there are differing BIM requirements that change based upon the project, right? The job, the scope, what you're doing, and even different parts of the same project can have different LOD requirements, and that can be really, really confusing. Right? Especially when you start looking into it and you start to realize there are numbering systems and code systems. There's LOD 100 and LOD 350 and 400. Right? People just panic. They just go, I don't know what any of those numbers are. I'm leaving. I'm out. We're done. Just leave that to the architectural technologists. They'll figure it out. So, even when you get, a company that's really developed it and they've got a good, written BIM implementation plans and a scope of work for the BIM process on a job, and that LOD, it's written out in front of you, it's still daunting, I think, for a lot of people. They're just not sure when or even how am I supposed to be applying different LOD levels while I'm doing a design. How do I even begin there, right? So with the process, Kim, of LOD definitions and the numbers, right? We start with, number one, where do they come from? Right? Who is the central governing agency, if there is one, for LOD? Is it the CIA? Is it the DOD? We don't know. That's all kinds of acronyms out there. Right?
The Kingsmen.
Yeah, the Kingsmen are doing it all. They're all behind it.
I love that movie.
Yeah, it's a great film. And how do we get those different definitions to be applied during our design process? Where do we go from there?
Yeah, so a good resource is actually the BIM Forum, and it's a chapter of Building Smart International, and they actually put out a level of development specification, and the latest version was back in April of 2019. So for the US at least, this is probably the resource to look at. As you said before, BIM development has really taken off in the UK and Australia, and I think maybe that's part of our discussion a little bit later, but the US is kind of lagging behind with this. And I think there again, it goes back to that whole confusion of exactly what we're talking about when we're looking at BIM. And the levels of development for me, and this is kind of my professional personal opinion, you can take it for what that's worth, but the level of development applies to the building model, and then you can get into I've even heard LODs being applied to levels of detail or levels of design or levels of detriment at some point.
I'm thinking that if you don't understand them all, detriment is probably the most likely outcome. Yes.
Right. But again, as you mentioned, you could have a building model that's at an LOD 350, which would be, for construction documents, if you want to kind of put that together. But maybe there are some elements in that model that are only modeled to an LOD 100. So, as far as, the way I look at it, I picture the model in its entirety being established at this level of development, LOD 350 for construction or 400 and higher for fabrication, things like that. So.
Okay. All right. And yeah, that kind of, goes back to what I was saying. I think if we take the level of development or detriment into account, the problem is that users, right, the designers, the users, all of the stakeholders in any job, they need to apply different levels of information based on the project scope, right? And sometimes that doesn't even entail 3D or even any drawing information at all. Sometimes it's just, the technical spec information, right? And if that's the case, right, then people need to realize that when you're dealing with tools like, Bricks CAD BIM or Revit, right, that they aren't a direct correlation directly to the building information model. They're tools that help you with layout, right, that naturally have kind of a level of development built into them when they're coming right out of the box, right? So, for here at Centellas, when we get into Revit, right, you're our resident expert, right? So when you're using Revit or Bricks CAD BIM or any other software right out of the box, right, what level of development are they using if you're using just kind of the out-of-the-box tools?
Yeah, so the families that are included within Revit right out of the box, they can get up to, again, it depends on the family, but you can get the model, up to probably a 350 construction level document. Anything beyond that, beyond, fabrication and so forth, you're going to need some additional heftier families, and additional software for analysis and so forth. So, right out of the box, the families that are included, most of them, I should say, are around the level 300 or 350 development.
Perfect. See, and that leads perfectly right into the sales pitch here, right? Which is at the end of the day, if you guys need help with that, we have an architectural technologist on staff here at Centec who can help you do that. So you can reach out to us.
There you go.
So, Rocco, all right, so we had this little bit of conversation here, and you're the non-technical user here. So if you're listening to this podcast, you went through what Kim and I were just talking about, does Kim's explanation make sense to you? I mean, do you think that helps elevate your understanding of BIM, and you think that clients will understand a little better, and you can talk a little bit better about what BIM is when you're on the phone with them?
I think so. It's just that it doesn't really come up, to be honest with you. I mean, people don't call and ask me what is BIM. It's I think a lot of people try to kind of pull together an assessment and understanding on their own from their own research, but it doesn't come up that often, Jim.
Okay. All right. So people just don't want to, either they really do believe they know what it is, or they just don't want to talk about it and show them. It's the emperor's new clothes. If we don't talk about it, it's not real.
It's not
Outstanding. All right. So
awesome.
With that said, we're going to take a quick break here. It's a good time to break for a word from today's sponsor. And we'll be back in just a few minutes with Kim Fuhrman here on the Cattle Call Podcast. All right, everybody. Today's podcast is being brought to you by BricsCAD. BricsCAD, the AutoCAD alternative that will give you all of the tools that you need in the AutoCAD design world, but in a simpler, more affordable package. In particular, today's session is being brought to you by BricsCAD BIM, the 3D modeling system that is the BricsCAD version of Revit. It actually allows you to go in and do all of your 3D modeling, all of your BIM intelligence in your standard DWG file. So you can do your 2D layout and drafting using all the same tools that you have and easily convert those over to full 3D models, and then add in and automatically using artificial intelligence convert all of that data into fully developed BIM models to the level of development that you need. BricsCAD BIM, probably the greatest advent into the BIM world in the last decade. So, Rocco, tell the kind folks how they can reach out to us and how they can get more information about BricsCAD BIM.
Sure, you can reach out to us at zentecconsultants.net. That's ZENTEK consultants.net. Or you can give us a ring, 866-824-4459. And how about I'll give you an email address too. It's sales@zentecconsultants.net.
All right, lots of ways to reach out to us about BricsCAD BIM. All right, we are back once again with the Cattle Call Podcast with Jim Rocco and our special guest today, Kim Fuhrman. So every I don't know if you've heard the podcast in the past, Kim, but I like to do the maths. I like to get out numbers and all the good stuff, right? I scour the interwebs and find all of the great statistics that I like to throw at people. So I did a little research on BIM usage and adoption here in the world. And I went out and hit Geospatial World, right? And according to them, BIM usage by design firms is the highest in the UK, right? We said that earlier. Yep. And it's primarily because of government requirements. The UK actually went ahead and back in 2016, they put out laws that said you had to do all new construction projects for government work had to be done with a base building information model. And because of that, right, you find in the UK that 20% of the industry is using BIM regularly, okay? Whereas 75% of them are using BIM, but not regularly. They use it here and there on smaller jobs, right? 80% of the firms in the UK, right, that have 15 or more staff have adopted to BIM at some level, right? Not some more, some less. But less than 60% of the firms with 15 or fewer employees are using BIM at all. They're not doing any kind of building information modeling, right? And the truth is, based on it, is that most firms are only using BIM on their largest projects, usually less than 10% of their total workload. Right? And when we get to the U.S., you find that U.S. BIM adoption rates are much lower, right? Because there has been no government mandate for usage here. And they expect them to be probably less than half of what the U.K. is. Okay? So what we're finding is that surprisingly, even people who are using BIM regularly, they're very often, more than 50% of the time, mistakenly reporting those numbers. And exactly what we're talking about here today, they're saying, oh yeah, we use BIM because, well, they use Revit. And if they have Revit in-house, then they're doing BIM. So they're doing 3D modeling so that they're all doing BIM. And the reality of it is that they're not necessarily involved in BIM at any level. So there's still, I think, a big gap between what's being reported and what's being used as BIM, even though I think the UK is definitely way ahead of us in this process. So Kim, even though we do have systems like Revit and they do have BIM features natively built in, can we really call it a BIM model if people aren't actively adding LOD data and extracting that information for some type of construction use?
So looking at my short answer that I wrote in my notes was no. Just no.
Well, that was a good answer. Thank you for your time today.
Yeah. You have to look at BIM as a process, not as a deliverable. And, when we're talking about BIM, we're looking at the life cycle of the building. We're looking at the design development. We're looking at construction. We're looking at facilities management, and then maybe eventually demolition or renovation, and then you start the process all over again. So the intent of BIM, I guess, if you will, is to create this living model that is, you hear the catchphrase nowadays. Okay, so BIM is kind of 20 years ago is when it really started,
Are you calling me old? Is that what you're doing?
No, let's see.
I do that, Kim. Don't worry.
That's all right. Rocco does all the time.
Well, I told you how long I've been in this business. So,
yeah, but I've been in longer, so that's worse.
Then yes, you're old.
I'm old.
I completely forget where I was going with that.
But
the BIM has been around for longer than we actually think, and but now they're talking about this whole digital twin. And with the digital twin, we have this building model that holds the information. It informs us of building processes and systems and what's going on in the building. It tells us when we need to change our furnace filters, things like that. So that is where the BIM process really takes off. It's kind of that post-construction, and then you get into that whole, okay, then who owns that model? And we could get into a whole lot of legalese, which I'm not going to today. But, you kind of cross that line of who owns the model, who owns the information. Is it the architect who updates the model? Is it the owner? So there's this whole kind of, there's no really black and white answer to BIM and the process just yet.
Excellent. So, and I think you've hit the nail right on the head, right? I still think a large portion of people out there look at BIM strictly in terms of construction. Right? It's about conflict checking, interference checking, modularization, scheduling. But yeah, there's much more to it. It's a long-term life cycle development system. So here are terms that I see all the time, and I just think people are making this stuff up because I honestly don't even understand what this is. Yeah, I constantly see, it's BIM 4D and BIM 5D, and pretty soon we're going to be BIM 35E. I don't know what any of these.
Yeah,
what is this?
I think it even goes up to like 6, maybe 6 and even 7. We're starting to talk about things like, the clash detection, and then the pricing and so forth. So that's, they really took the construction process that we've known for forever and broken it out into bits and pieces. So when you're talking, kind of going back to the LOD discussion, you can see LOD 100 as being a schematic design, and the 5D BIM being this, where you get into your pricing and quantity takeoffs and things like that. So again, it's, just different steps in the process for sure.
Yeah, and that's actually a good point, right? That you can actually embed all of that data, cost, pricing data, materials, labor, all that can be embedded directly into a true BIM model, right? And that's not necessarily things that you're going to be doing in a 3D model. That's when we, like I said, get into the different LODs. So to my limited brain, it seems like, the biggest issue that we're facing with BIM growth, it's really one of scale. Small firms and smaller projects are still ignoring it. Right? And I think it's primarily from a belief that it's too difficult, it's too expensive for what they're doing. Right? And I think that, even among people who claim that they're using BIM, right, that a lot of them are really just doing 3D based modeling and using BIM ready tools, but they're not effectively using or applying any LOD. They're not looking at data sharing. They're not looking at lifecycle management. They're not doing the data twinning. I mean, all of those different features are being ignored, I think, still by a very large portion of our industry, both from the owners all the way through the advanced, architectural designers. And that's really what BIM was intended for, right? So, we kind of have to look at it, I think, in terms of, what do we, as an industry, how do we push a broader BIM implementation and understanding, right? And do we have to get into it in, terms of, training? Do we need better software? Do we need completely different software? Do we need to simplify the process and have less technobabble and people stop adding numbers in front of the letter D, so we have 75D, right, for BIM plans to kind of get everybody back down into reality? There's a lot, I think, that has to be done there. And I think, like you said, there's a lot of conversations that have to happen in terms of base understanding of what BIM really is, the long-term cycle. And like I said, it's not as easy as that, because you made an excellent point in that you do start to get into some legal control issues, right? Over, data storage and data housing and data ownership, right? Proprietary rights. So Rocco, let me ask you, again, going back to always what the clients have to say. When you talk to people who are still, and I know we've had these conversations before, who are still back in the 2D layout design world, they're not even doing 3D, all right? Why aren't they willing to make that move into BIM? Do they think it's just too hard to learn, or the software and the time, it's just too much money? Is it too expensive? What are they saying?
I think it's more of a kind of back to what I said earlier. It's more of they do it when they're forced into it. But other than outside of being forced into it, they just don't have the time or see the full value in working in 3D. The other thing is, you have a lot of the smaller firms are still working on 2D. They don't. So it's the larger firms that you see using Revit more heavily and maybe talking about BIM a little bit more. Does that kind of make sense to you guys?
Yeah, actually, I just this week received drawings from a contractor that were hand drawn.
Wow.
So I think it's
really.
Yeah,
I didn't know
absolutely.
anybody still did that.
Yeah, and I, personally, I think it's a matter of business value. I was in a lunch and learn yesterday with an engineering company, and they're doing some fabulous things with AR and VR, which is probably a whole other podcast topic. But businesses will adopt practices that provide value to them, and I think that's kind of where the larger firms, of course, have more resources available to them. They tend to be more on the cutting edge of the technology and what's coming down the road. A lot of smaller firms don't have those resources, or don't see the value. So I think that's the biggest thing that's holding firms back. Whether regardless of size, it's the business value. What value is this going to add to what we do?
Right. And I think you're absolutely right. It's a lot of it is about scope, right? If you're a design firm and you're doing a $10 million design job, you've got some padding, you've got some leeway in there to afford to experiment and move forward with new technologies. Versus, if you're doing the little local pad site, for the drive-through, and you're probably walking away with $3,000 in your pocket at the end of the day. You're not taking the time to learn BIM and do that whole thing, because there's no return on the value. There's no return on investment. So, that's
Rocco
point.
said that's what I'm getting for this podcast too.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. and he's taking it out of his personal funds because he's the rich one. That's why we set this up in the beginning. Hi, you see, you thought I was just crazy.
No, this is in writing.
Yes, but it's recorded, so you're still in trouble. All right, so Kim, I'm gonna leave you with one last question here today.
Sure.
In terms of building information modeling and best use of it, what one takeaway would you like listeners to kind of walk away from today's podcast with? What do you want them to be thinking about after they're done listening here?
Yeah, so I think our designers, our design professionals, I think we need to look outside of our own silos, and that for the longest time is how we have worked in the design industry, in the construction industry. You have the architect over here and the engineers over here, and maybe eventually they'll get together and talk. Whereas with BIM, it's a collaborative process, and it has to be a collaborative process from the beginning. And with creating this living model, with creating this informational model that has everything in it from the start, there's so much that can be done even in the design stages that can save money in the field. So any clash detection or any decisions that can be made through the building model that aren't being made in the field, it'll save you that much in RFIs and construction changes.
Absolutely. Okay. Excellent. Good points. All right. So to kind of sum up today's topic, all right, I think we've made pretty clear that 3D and BIM are not the same thing, though they are very closely related, and there's a good amount of overlap to both of them. And I think if, folks who are listening, if you heard some of the concepts today that maybe you're not 100% familiar with in terms of BIM and LOD and all the things we were talking about, then maybe you want to look into getting more info on BIM. And AUGI, right, is a great starting spot for Autodesk users. And now, obviously, I was wrong, more users, pretty much anybody out there.
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's a great place to go and start that conversation. There are lots of forums and discussions, things you can work with there. I'm a big fan of AUGI. I have been for years. And, of course, as always, Zentech is here to help. All right, and I want to thank you, Kim, for being here today. Again, Kim Fuhrman, the president of AUGI, who has great big new things coming out. And all right, we hope to have you back again, and we really appreciate your input today.
Yeah, thank you for having me again. This was fun.
No worries. It was great. All right, people. So we're going to sign off here and point out to you that our next podcast topic, we're going to be talking about parametric versus direct modeling. Which is better? Are you excited, Rocco?
I'm always excited.
I can tell. You love the high-end tech call. All right, folks. I'll talk to you next time on the Cattle Call Podcast. All right, everybody. Today's Cattle Call was brought to you courtesy of Zentech Consultants. That's Rocco and I. Zentech Consultants works with design and manufacturing firms to help our clients purchase and implement the software that they need in these complex industries. We provide a single point of contact for clients to buy, develop, and learn the most vital software systems for your specific needs. Zentech strives to be your trusted technology partner from your initial needs all the way through long-term support and training for your entire staff. So Rocco, why don't you tell them how to reach out to Zentech?
All right, yeah, you can reach out to us through zentechconsultants.net. You can email us at sales@zentechconsultants.net, or you can even call us 866-824-4459.
Excellent. We look forward to hearing from you all.